And now we're on the road to Chicago. For your HR niche is the magic of a story. In a few minutes, you'll meet our Chicago-based friends, Elena Valentine, James Ellis, and Amber Kennelly. But first, a little bit about the inspiration for our trip to Chicago. It's really twofold. First, from the words of Studs Terkel, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Working and Chicago, and an iconic figure in Chicago history. He said this: "Work is a search for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor. In short, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying." Our second inspiration was the Humans at Work film series produced by Skill Scout. So take a watch with me.
You guys ready for paleta? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Cómo estás? Yo creo que fresa para mí. Yeah. What are you getting, Pops? Rico, ¿le puedes bajar un poquito? Nana essentially started as an idea inspired by my mom. Everything was based around food. Like little pancakes. No. You can already have it prepped ahead of time. It comes out the same way that you do it. My father, along with his father, opened up a taqueria in 1967. The struggles he had operating the first Mexican restaurant here in the neighborhood that's known for segregation was able to, push through and then, be appreciated by the area. Business that existed for nearly 50 years that sadly closed. I was really deeply inspired by trying to bring that into a neighborhood that wasn't really recognized for food, and especially local sourcing, sustainability, organic. And these are some of the things that I wanted to bring into this restaurant. This is about really bringing something back to the neighborhood that they truly miss and that was part of their upbringing. Ajo was recently opened February 6, 2019. That inspiration was drawn by my lovely wife, who is Puerto Rican, and also my exposure to other Caribbean food.
We make everything here on site, and not authentic Puerto Rican Cuban food, like our take. So super fresh, feels good. It's like feel-good food.
Ajo was the building that I grew up in. Actually, this space back in the 80s used to be my uncle's key shop. Little detail worthy of mentioning are these countertops, which used to be the door to my house upstairs. Yet another memory used in another manner. All right, we are now standing in what is to become Taco Eat, which was a business in existence here in Bridgeport for over 50 years. My dad here was one of the owners. I threw it out on Facebook as an idea to pop it up. The response from the people, from the neighborhood especially, was so overwhelming. I felt that I kind of had an obligation to bring this thing back. Eventually, part back here will become the full restaurant itself. Initially, these storefronts were broken up into 3 storefronts. In the last storefront used to be an ice cream parlor that my mom opened up that was named after me, Omar's Ice Cream. It was gonna be something of a bit of the future. This is definitely a labor of love. I was just filled with energy and so much inspiration that I was like, man, I gotta make this happen. Because I never realized how impactful this restaurant was to so many people. From that moment, I'm like, wow, this is not about me now. This is about really bringing something back to the neighborhood that they truly miss and that was part of their upbringing. Now we're here, the ball's in my court. I have a whole neighborhood behind me, which, I mean, I'm kind of getting chills, thinking about it right now. It's awesome to know that I'm just going to come behind and just, bring this back.
Excellent. Well, I love that story, and it certainly highlights some great parts of Chicago. And well, I don't know about you, but looking at all that food made me super hungry, especially on a dreary day like we have today here in Chicago. As Bud mentioned, Studs Terkel is a Chicago fixture. He's advocated for the common American through telling great stories. And here we are in Chicago. As a Chicagoan, I can certainly share with you that we are a community with deep roots. Or roots, depending on where you're from in Chicago, thick networks and lots of great stories. So to kick us off, one of my favorite quotes of Studs Terkel's is, "I want, of course, peace, grace, and beauty. How do you do that? You work for it." This is a great segue into introducing our speakers today. Let me introduce you to two fantastic and certainly lively people who have worked for it and are, to be certain, going to be bringing some amazing energy and perspective to our conversation today. First, Elena Valentine. Elena is an entrepreneur, an HR advocate, and film creator at Skill Scout. Sorry, Elena. Skill Scout was created to bring video and storytelling into the hiring process to help increase access and exposure to careers. Today, Skill Scout helps companies tell their stories on video to attract, hire, and engage great talent. Thank you so much, Elena, for being here today. We also have James Ellis. James is the Global Employer Brand Manager at Roku. I'm a big fan of Roku, by the way, and the creator of The Talent Cast, a fantastic podcast about employer brand. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. You can pay me for that, James, later. It will inspire you and energize you for sure. Described as the fearless inventor of the future, James is going to bring some great stories. James, thank you so much for being here with us today. Yeah, I've set the expectations really high for us. Let's talk about the intersection of HR and storytelling. Let's talk about the meaning of work through story. Elena and James, all yours.
We only have an hour.
Awesome.
Okay, everybody, sit back. This is a 6-hour series lecture. Here we go. Elena, go. What the heck is all this about?
Yeah, I think for me, a quote that always stands out is from Patty Deeg. She says, "The shortest distance between two people is a story." And our workplace is filled with people, which means that our workplaces are filled with stories. And in a time when we are craving connection, when we're craving relatability, there really is an art and a science to, I think, how we can engage our workplace and our workforce through the power of stories when it comes to anything around increasing emotional connection. And that could mean how we bring jobs to life for job seekers to get a better understanding of what the jobs are like. But it also includes things like how we might engage our workplaces around a particular initiative. When we think about our missions, when we think about our visions, nothing is more powerful than a story. And so I've been very privileged to be walking in my purpose to do just that. Honestly, I think I have the coolest job in HR, which is to be a fly in the wall and to capture the amazing stories of our workplaces. And James has been, as much as he'll, I think, get into an awkward starfish like face, I think, as we've built our business, he's been so great in helping us think about how we elevate HR content as art and making that into something that can be universal. Because if it's one thing that we all have in common, unless we're trust funds, it is work. And we spend our lives, majority of the time at work, we spend many times trying to reflect on the meaning of our work. And that's really what, for me, is really the convergence of HR and storytelling, and has been kind of my purpose, my career purpose.
And I wish more HR people would think about that stuff. I think, and this is not me stepping on toes, and Lord knows that, me and HR tend to do this a lot, because HR lives by this concept of rules are great. Rules are amazing. We live to create and manipulate and manage and execute the rules, because that's just the brain space of HR, right? And yet here we are, they're applying these rules. It's with love, Amber, with love. You have to take it both ways. But the problem is these rules get applied to the messiest things in the universe called human beings. And those two things, it's just like nailing Jello to a wall. You can't expect it to really work. And so if more HR people really understood that it's about creating connections and not applying rules, that's where stories really kind of connect the dots. That's where stories really say, look, it's not about applying rules. It's not about saying you're hired, you're fired. It's not about saying, you're allowed this much money when you go out to dinner, when you take a client out to work. It's about, what are we trying to tell the world? And I think from my point of view, from an employer brand point of view, which we could do for 4 hours, and I won't let me, which is smart. We don't talk about the meaning of work. We don't talk about the meaning of work in this place. What does it mean for me to say I work at Roku? What does it mean for me to say that I work at the post office? What does it mean when I say I work at a startup or a massive company or EY or whoever the heck it is? What does it mean? And take it the next step further. What do I want it to mean? If I'm introduced to someone at a party and I say, I work for Bank of America, what do I want that person to think of me? And understanding that underlies that story, and it sets up a good story. Because what Elena will tell you very quickly, I'm sure, is that you can't just make a story. It's about making your story.
Yeah. And to that point, and I'll pass it off to Amber, someone who's a CHRO, I think one of the biggest things we get caught up in when we start to launch story initiatives or a video initiative or any sort of kind of initiative in our workplaces is actually HR has to go first. As people leaders, we have to own our own story. We have to be comfortable with how we speak about our story, and whether that's through a blog, whether that's through film, which obviously I have an opinion on, it is something that we have to model for others. And so, I think the biggest takeaway in the ask of our HR leaders on this call is that we have to get to our why and to know our purpose as well. And we have to be very comfortable with sharing that. So I guess, Amber, I know you're supposed to be the moderator, but if I had to ask, what makes your heart sing? When it comes to the work that you do, what is that? What would that be? Why are you still in this industry?
Well, Elena and James, right? I knew I was not going to just be the moderator in this discussion in our practice. So thank you for that. You actually said something that really resonates with me. And you said we need to start with our why. So many of us in HR and elsewhere have had the opportunity to hear Simon Sinek, and he wrote the book Start With Why. I'm a big fan of Simon's, or Mr. Sinek, I suppose. And in fact, I have had the opportunity to work with HR teams to talk about what is our why? Why are we here? And I really agree with your statement that we have to start there, because that then gives us focus and direction and really serves as our North Star when things get challenging, like they have this year. So I agree with you, really understanding your purpose and your why is critical. And for myself, because you did ask me, I would say the reason I love my job so much is because I do have the opportunity to bring people together. While I am a CPA by training, I've always leaned toward the people side of things. I know, James, who knew?
CPA. Whoa, Amber.
CPA plus HR, my goodness, it's a wonder world.
I went to school to be an accountant, and here I am as a CHRO. But I always have shared that for me, HR is translating the people dynamics that are messy through kind of the secret decoder ring into business strategy and analytical reports and dashboards and all of that. And the two can't live separately. They have to be connected.
Yeah.
And I feel like my why has been being able to bring people and kind of business strategy and analytics together to really drive awesome outcomes.
Yeah. And those are connected. I mean, you have to look at it on some level, a company holistically. And there are very, very, very few people inside a company who are designated to do that. Sales is focused on sales. Legal is focused on not getting sued. You know, pick your team, and that's their remit, and that's what they're focused on. So who's there to take 4 steps back and say, what is this company all about? Now, one might say the CEO, and that's certainly true, right? We have a CEO with us. And that is really what her job is among like 7,000 others, depending on the day. But there's very few other people doing that. And I think the more you can have people, not just in the C-suite, but people around, I think employer brand has that opportunity. Learning and development has that opportunity. You know, there are a couple places where you can really say, what is this company all about? What is the you know, to quote Uncle Seth Godin here, what is the dent you're making in the universe? What is the change?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the big change, how does that trickle down to all those teams? If the change you're making in the universe is to save the whales, that's going to change how sales works. If your dent in the universe you're going to make is we're going to sell this app to about a bajillion people, it's going to change your sales team. It trickles down to everybody. And if you let it be accidental, you're screwed. Because when stuff happens, and I don't know if you've looked around in 2020, it's about the year that stuff happened. You know, it's not just the expletive hitting the fan, it's everything hitting the fan. Okay, that's when everything gets tested. And so that's what it's about. If you understand what you're all about, if you get to that why, then you get a chance to say, this is what our North Star and this is why we do what we do.
Exactly. No, and it's interesting. And I know, James, you have a particular analogy for this because it isn't just about, I think the problem that we've had with the narratives of our workplace is it has been heavily filtered and heavily guided by the narratives of a particular leader or a particular subset, because we've been too afraid, I think, to say, hey, if all of our employees told stories or told their perspectives, what would we actually get?
Yeah, chaos.
And in reality, especially now for this new generation coming up, who is very used to sharing stories on all kinds of platforms, we really have to think thoughtfully about what it means to be able to tell the mission of our companies through the eyes of, quite frankly, as many people as possible, because it's the sum of all of its parts. And I certainly have an analogy for this. I know that James has his own. And for me, it's the 7 blind men and the elephant. I don't know if anyone's heard that parable, the Indian parable. And it goes like this. You have an elephant that goes into an Indian village. No one's ever seen, experienced, felt, touched, smelled an elephant. And you have 7 blind men who go up to this elephant, and one of the blind men is, you know, touching the trunk, and he's like, "Oh, this feels like a snake. An elephant must be a snake." The other one touches the ear. "Oh, the elephant must be a fan," and on and on and on. And then they all just end up fighting that this elephant. No, the elephant is a fan. The elephant is a trunk. The elephant is a wall. And really, you have to step back and realize, actually, those things are all true. The elephant is all of those things. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why we can understand what it is to so many people is we have to take a step back and realize that it's a yes and. And that's very much about when it comes to the narratives of our companies as well, is that you are going to go a lot faster by being able to showcase the stories and perspectives of not just your leaders, but of folks who've only been there for 6 months. Of folks who, you know, UPS is this great example of everyone kind of just really starts off as a package handler. And we need those stories too, just as much as we need the stories of others. And I think that's been one of the biggest kind of trends and learnings as we've continued to, I think, expand and tell the stories of companies, is just how important that is. And now that we have so many social platforms and so many ways to slice and dice that, we really can do that. And in turn, attract the kinds of candidates inevitably that will relate to any one of those folks, and in employees, vice versa.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing is the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth in terms of, you know, for anybody who's been doing this for a little while, and I'm old, so I'll own it. You remember 5-10 years ago when anybody said, "Oh, we should make a recruitment video," and they all went, "Well, God, I don't have $40,000." right? They all thought it was like this commercial for the Super Bowl quality commercial. And it was this epic thing. And if they ever scraped together the cash, what they built was so boring and so samey as everybody else that it was effectively worthless. And what you're saying is, and taking it back to that metaphor, the elephant, we've all learned how to step back to see the elephant, but now we're learning to step forward and saying, what's my part of the elephant, right? What a developer, what a nurse, what an electrician, what an orderly in any given organization, the localized message of what this brand, what this idea, what this company means to me is about me and not about the logo on the side of the building. And what you're wanting to do, and I think Elena has been, instrumental in really promoting this idea that it's not about the 30, 40,000 video. It's about how do I make teeny tiny videos with these supercomputers in our pockets that allow me to make this nurse video? And frankly, how do I make a Black nurse video and a male nurse video and a blank verse video? And just how do I make 1,000 of these so that when a male nurse goes, oh gosh, every time I look at a website, all I see is women nurses, I don't belong here. There's a video of a male nurse. Now, is that the norm? No, but to say these are individual stories and to create an infrastructure that supports and promotes these individual stories that allows people, because let's be fair, Facebook and Google and all these channels that we use are about personalization. The world of the web I see is not the same that anybody on this call sees. And so searching for a job is the same way. Understanding what that brand is the exact same way. And so, what Skill Scout does is say, how do we make it so that you can tell any story, no matter how minute, because that subtlety makes a world of difference to the person whose story you're telling and to the people who should connect to that story.
Mm-hmm. James, I appreciate what you're sharing. And I mean, certainly having the opportunity to see yourself in any of these career-oriented or talent marketplace-oriented videos is so important. And, we've touched on 2020 being, just 2020. Yeah. And
dumpster fire.
On my mind and on the mind of many HR folks is the need or the desire to evolve our company's story. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on how can we best do that and any advice you'd have to offer.
I don't know where I'd start. I mean, here's what I think. And of course, it's purely my thinking. And of course, Elena gets to do this all day long. So she gets this. I'm talking about clay conceptually. She's got her hands dirty, right? It's a different model. But what I think is that we're starting to learn how to get deeper, that it's, that as employer brand as a concept has exploded over the last 5 years, if you Google generic employer brand video, there's a great video someone made of literally a generic employer brand. And they all look the same and they all sound the same. And they all have a talking head who's a white dude. And he's saying what a great company he is, but never specifies why or how or to whom. It's just, hey, it's a great company. And hey, there's a kid with a skateboard and this open seating. And they all look like everybody else. The game is all about, and this gets all the way back to this idea of what's the story you're telling? So for example, if you're Goldman Sachs, not to pick on them, but they're a hedge fund, and it's not like there are a lot of people on their website wearing cheap watches, right? The pitch of a Goldman Sachs is to come work for us. There's a pile of money on the table, pick up the pile of money. Go to the Red Cross, not a lot of custom suits. It's a different story. And I think as we're starting to evolve our sense of what does it mean to tell a story and what does it mean to tell our story, we get deeper. And that's the trick, is that, and I think that's where Elena gets to spend the time, is to figure out what are the nuances, how does it connect, how do I tell the story of, in a country alone, let's not even get to global, in a country alone where there's 18 to 20 million different businesses, how do they all tell different stories? Because they are in fact all different places.
Yeah, and I think, there's two things that come to mind. Companies who do it right don't have to differentiate between their business brand marketing and their employer brand marketing. And there's actually a name for that. It's called cult brand status. And there's actually quite a few cult companies that we know of. Patagonia is a cult company. Harlem Globetrotters, a cult company. Coca-Cola is a cult company. And in some ways it has to do with the fact that they see the people's story, the behind the scenes of their people's story being very essential, regardless if this is to sell to their consumers or if this is about engaging their employees and their employers. And so that's one thing, is that the trends that we're seeing now is that actually, especially in 2020, This is a people story. The world is watching our companies in ways that they have never before. It used to be when our companies made a flub, that it was the candidates who paid attention. It was the employees who paid attention. Now you have consumers making loyalty and buying decisions based on how these companies have treated their employees during this time. And there are companies who have risen to the occasion, and there are companies who have failed badly. And so that's what we're up against now, is that, we are opening ourselves up now as a result to that level of scrutiny that we've never had before. And so I think that's, and because of that, we've had a lot more companies who've had to take that level of introspection to say, we need to change this around. And now that all of us are home and we're all kind of feeling the same way, finding more opportunities for employees to be a part of those conversations. And so that's a big trend we're seeing. But to your point, Amber and James, when you're talking about, all right, we all have our company values and it's real cute and we can talk about humility and, we show humility every day and blah, blah, blah. Like that doesn't work. Inevitably, you have to get super specific. And so there's really like some very simple tricks to this. If, for me, if one of our company values is no ego, or accountability, it's not just about being able to talk about it in the abstract. It's to say, tell me a moment when you, when you felt accountable to a project.
So you're asking people to tell stories.
What happened?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are the kinds of specifics that we have to get to. So things like describe a moment when, tell me about, describe. Those are the kinds of things that are going to get deeper into those examples. And if your company or your employees cannot provide very tangible examples of how all of those things are manifested, then that's not a real value that you have. And you need to think differently about what that value would be, because those are the kinds of stories that employees need to hear and your candidates.
Yeah, too many companies have what I refer to as poster fodder. They came up, they put a group together, a couple of hippos are in the room, they came up with what their values are. Really what they did is what sounds nice. Our customer is a value, honesty is a value, transparency is a value. You're like, great. And they make posters and they stick it up and they say, check, we're done. And you're like, no, that's not what it is. Because every company thinks customer is a value, which by the way, how is a customer value? But let's just kind of keep that to the side. But say, take no ego. Okay, that's a great thing to say. Now, how do you live that? What does that look like? And to me, what I try to do is I look for what's the edge to what is the furthest you can push that idea to the point where it falls apart. Like think of every company that says we care about our customers. And I say, oh, so you mean like Nordstrom's? Like you'll take back, return products that you don't actually sell, and they just look at me like, what are you nuts? I'm like, but that's what really pushing it to the edge looks like. And if you're going to say you're customer focused, what you're effectively doing is comparing yourself to a Nordstrom's who are famous for it. If you said we're safe, you're all up, but you're comparing yourself to Volvo, you're comparing yourself to, there's other brands that have owned that space. So you have to say, how far will you willing to push it? And again, it comes back to that idea of story. It's not that what you say is true. You don't say we have no ego. You don't say we're transparent. You show it, and you show it in the form of a story. Because if you don't live it, it's not real.
James, I appreciate what you're saying, and I really love the idea of pushing it to the limit to test. Is that really what we stand for, or is there something different that we ought to be speaking to? Because in fact, we're not competing, for example, with Nordstrom, who is customer.
Yeah.
So let's just really be honest with ourselves. I very much.
We treat values like a dot, and it's really a shape. It's like, okay, what is the shape of this value? How far in which direction are we able to push it? Because that value of customer service can be different shapes for different companies. Maybe they won't be Nordstrom's, which is pushed in a certain shape, but you might be in a very different place. You might be willing to say, look, we're going to go deeper. We're going to partner at a level where it feels like we're really part of your company. Is that a different shape than Nordstrom's? Yes. And that might be completely valid, but it's until you define what that shape is, and that shape comes from finding where the edges are, because without edges, it's not a shape, right? Let's get into geometry now. But again, it comes back to what are the stories you tell? And really it's about what are the stories the staff tell and what are the stories that leak out through the walls? What are the things that get out on your Glassdoor reviews? What are the stories that get on when you Google yourself? What are the stories that get out? Because those things, they're not independent of each other. You don't manufacture those stories and throw them over the wall and say, here, Glassdoor, take them, have fun. I hope I get a 5.4 score, which of course is impossible, I know. But what you do is you spur interest internally. You encourage them to tell stories. You give them the tools to tell stories. You give them platforms on which those stories may live and be distributed, and then they start to leak out. And by leaking, they feel far more authentic. Come on, storyteller, hit me. Come on.
I appreciate what you're sharing. And I also know that many of our organizations, again, in this just crazy year that we're dealing with, are trying to listen to employees and really assess, are we walking the talk? Do we live the values we've said we live or not? Do we need to evolve them? And I'd like to, if I might, just kind of switch the perspective a little bit. So maybe touch another side of the elephant, Elena, which is employees. So employees, we know, are most productive when they feel most connected to the purpose of a company. Mm-hmm. And Elena, I heard you say at the introduction that you feel blessed because you know your purpose and you live it every day. So I'm interested to hear your perspective as employees, or maybe even people in kind of a talent marketplace. How would you encourage us to think about building our own story or defining our story?
Yeah, so I think I want to take it a step back just so that we can see what does a good storytelling culture even look like, right? And there's a couple companies that are doing it really well, that literally are living and breathing. Their walls are filled with stories. Nike, everyone knows the stories of Phil Knight. They have integrated stories down to the first few weeks of onboarding in Beaverton. When you work for their corporate, you are going to the University of Oregon and you are running around that track. Just like, Mike did as he's, thinking about how he's prototyping the next best shoe. And they are living and breathing that. And the reason why I say that is that's a major implementation that right from the start that employee has begun, they already are starting to live and breathe the lore of what that company's ethos is. And so that's a great example just to kind of share what that is. The other one that I've seen, has done a good job are, if anyone's heard of Shinola out of Detroit. And what Shinola does well, if you've ever gone into any of their retail stores, is their walls are filled with their workers, of the tanneries, of their watchmakers, these beautifully done photos with their own stories of how things were made. So that when you're walking in, you're not, I'm not just buying a watch to buy a watch. I'm like, man, I feel like I know Michelle and Juan and Derek who touched this watch, and that there's something so special, and that as a result, I'm seeing in recognizing I'm paying a value for that. And so that's just, another perfect example of, again, when you can even take stories and contribute it to how a consumer feels about that, particular brand, right? And so I say that just for all of us to think about, before we can even think about, well, how do we tell our own stories? It's looking at who's been doing this already, and doing this really well. And in fact, in Chicago, and I have to give credit where credit's due. We built this business on the shoulders of small to mid-sized manufacturers in the Midwest. So we know our CNC machinists, our tool and die makers really, really well. And, it's interesting when we took on the challenge of manufacturers and telling their stories, while, maybe the entire, Schaumburg may have not known how, amazing Weigel tool is. By gosh, all of those employees certainly know that story. I think manufacturers don't give themselves enough credit. And I think because these are, second, third generation owned, enough credit to just how deep their folks know the origin stories and how much they live kind of the stories of the why they started this. And so certainly for folks interested, I can, certainly share, several examples, but I think part of it before we can think about, and we can get into specifics of how we tell our stories, because there's research and there's discovery, it's knowing that you can get inspired a lot by companies who are doing this already, because we have to think thoughtfully that it's not just about how we tell our story, right? That's this can't be a one and done thing. Inevitably, what we have to build up to is an actual storytelling culture. And so what that means are two things. We're building an appreciation and a mindset for story, and we're also building the capacity of our teams. And so I've certainly at this point, right, I've been sharing a lot on how do we build the capacity, how do we build the mindset, and appreciation, and now we can get to capacity. But I certainly want to throw this on James as well, because, you've built the capacity building of stories from scratch at Groupon. I don't know how much you can share about Roku now, because I know you're knee deep into it. But just like, what does that mean to build capacity in our teams once we've built the mindset and appreciation for it?
Yeah, it's so tough because inherently humans are storytelling creatures. And it feels like we beat ourselves out of that as we quote unquote grow up, right? I have a 6-year-old, soon to be 6-year-old in 3 weeks. She's going to be turned 6 years old, and everything is a story. Everything, and it's not a drawn out story. It's a simple story, but I know that education and life are going to slowly beat those storytelling muscles out of her. What's the line? Artists are the kids who grew up without getting that stuff beat out of them. So that's the thing, is that you have to kind of say, look, every person has the ability to tell the story. And really, it starts by that first saying, every person has the ability to appreciate a story. You can't build what you don't love. And so if you don't see them, if you don't, engage with them, if you don't realize that the stories are around you every day, that the stories of the brands you engage with every day are there, you don't know how to build them. You are looking for some sort of platonically perfect ideal of what the story should be. And that's why I focus, and this is why Elena and I get along so well, is that we know it's not about the story. It's about a story. And it's functionally, it's like Sundays at the Park with George. There's a Chicago reference for you. The painting that is a million little dots of color. You're not making a painting, you're making a dot of color. And that dot of color must be authentic to your story. It must be authentic to who you are. It must be true and honest to that instance, that context, that specificity, to that team, to that location, to that thing. The fact that that blue is not the same as that blue actually is a pro, because you're not making a blue painting, you're making a painting of telling a story. And so what you need to do is encourage people to say, those stories are all around you. All you have to do is identify them and collect them. Now, having done that, you build those stories. You can do that in about a bajillion different ways. You can do it in haiku. Go nuts. Why wouldn't it work? Why wouldn't haiku work? Why wouldn't sidewalk chalk work? Why wouldn't, you don't need a lot of resources to do it. Like I said, everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's cell phone, right? How old am I? Everybody's got an iPhone or an Android. It takes, 4K video. It does, super high quality stuff. It can take pictures. You can write text. You can tell stories. You can do all these sorts of things. The answer isn't so much to say is what's the painting I'm making, but to allow people to express themselves in a more true. Now you give them some guidelines, you give them some structure. You don't say, hey, don't swear. Hey, don't say that company's name. We don't talk about them, even though they're our competition. You do the HR dance, right? You give some guidelines, but then you say, now tell me your story. The creativity comes when you say, how would you describe your job to your grandmother? What is the impact?
I always do the 11-year-old niece.
Oh, that's a good one.
So when I do an interview, when I do interviews, I'll just give you my pitch now because I do a lot of these. Amber, it is so awesome to have you here today. I know that we haven't met, but first of all, thank you so much for even taking the time to prepare some of the responses. I know I sent you some of those questions in advance. A little bit about what we're going to do today. So first of all, let's pretend like the cameras don't exist. It's just you and me having an informal conversation. Another thing I just want you to know, Amber, is that you're not in the hot seat here. I want you to know that you are the expert of your experience. So I'm not fishing for any particular answers. You're here because I really want to understand, that the CHR role or the office administration role, for this job. So I just want you to know that you've been selected because you're just doing an awesome and amazing job. But a couple of things here as well, right? We're, sharing this to other candidates. They don't know our company. They don't know all of our acronyms. So let's pretend like I'm your 11-year-old niece. I know nothing about Hub International. I know nothing about your acronyms. So the more simplified and basic your language could be, the better. And so again, if you feel like you messed up on a phrase, by all means, just take a deep breath and repeat yourself. But again, we are here because, again, we just want to celebrate you. At the end of this, right, as I'm laying out the process for you, this is going to probably come out into a blog, or this could be a video, or whatever this is. So our 20-minute conversation is going to probably come out into maybe 30 seconds, but don't worry, we're going to get the best of the best. And if we can, we also will share with you what we're going to share, because we know that this isn't totally part of your job description. So any way that we can make you feel comfortable and celebrated, we will. Before we get started, any questions for me?
Okay, you've done that once or twice.
Wow, right? I'm just going to tape that and borrow it. That's fantastic.
But Emily, that's how you get comfortable. And so I guess what I say is, when we're thinking about how we are helped getting the stories of others, the reason why the role of HR is super important is because the role of the interviewer and the role of setting up the framework for this is lying on you. Mm-hmm. You are the one that has to be the story listener, which is something that we can talk even longer about what it means to be a great story listener, because inevitably this is about, this is in part about being storytellers and how we bring it out. But our role as HR is to be incredible story listeners. Mm-hmm. And when I know in James, when he's done projects, et cetera, is that inevitably we're here to listen and get the most from as many people as possible.
Yeah, and that's how you create those individual dots, because you're, looking at all these different ideas with the same lens, but allowing your subject to kind of be the subject, to say, let them be who they need to be. Let them talk about their job. Let them, it's not about spouting the company line. It's about saying, what does this concept of why we work here work in your world? Not in your teams, not in your locations, not what your boss says it is, in your work. And as granular as you can get that, the more authentic it is. Now, the value of that is, and I live in kind of a recruiting side of things rather than HR per se, not that that's a particularly strongly drawn line, but it's this idea of that, look, if you're trying to hire nurses or electricians or data scientists or whatever, you're a recruiter, you're an HR, you need to learn how to speak those languages. Best of luck. What you do instead is listen to someone who speaks that language and project that story out. So if I'm trying to attract more data scientists, I talk to a data scientist and I use their words and I project it out, because one, now I'm speaking the language of the data scientist, and two, the data scientist I just talked to is going to share that story by themselves. And so now I'm reaching audiences I don't normally reach. They're speaking a language and a vernacular I don't necessarily understand, but is more authentic to the people I'm trying to reach. And thus, it's not so much about how do I grab people and find them and say, how do I get this person to apply? It's like, how do I make myself clear so that people go, oh, is that what it's like over there? Interesting. And they say, I wanted to be a part of that. Or conversely, and just as valuably, they go, yeah, no, thank you. No, thanks. I'm really good. Those are both optimal options. It's the fact when people go, what does that mean? That sounds like every other company. That is the fail. That is you've missed the point. So letting people tell their story authentically has so many knock-on effects.
And this is kind of a stupid detail, but as we think about our workplaces and our global workplaces, it's as simple as letting them speak in their own native language. I mean, that's just a perfect example, right? And so what often, for example, is challenging is we're asking folks to not only be on camera, but to speak English when Polish or Spanish or Chinese or Japanese is clearly the language of how we see the world. And I think it fault sometimes of some of our international companies that might be, for example, more US centric, is we're an English speaking company. All right, everyone's speaking English. So not only are we asking folks to do something that's very uncomfortable, which is to be on camera or share their stories, we're asking them to also speak in English. And so sometimes it's showing that level of deference and respect to say, you know what? Speak in Spanish. Okay. And in fact, quite frankly, we know Spanish is spoken on this facility floor anyway.
Right.
We are likely going to be hiring Spanish speaking candidates anyway. So what we need to do as story listeners is to make sure that we are having the supports to make sure that that speaker in Spanish or in English or in Portuguese or whatever can speak from the heart. And so it's as simple as that.
So James and Elena, I appreciate what you're sharing and love the idea of asking people to talk about themselves and their experiences as a way of capturing stories that kind of together all create the story of the company. I also appreciate it might be hard for people to think about, oh my gosh, you know, what am I going to talk about? Mm-hmm. What are some tricks of the trade questions that you have to really draw those stories out of people?
I think the talk to your mom, your grandmother, your 11-year-old niece is great. I think trying to, and I'm going to say a word that is not right, but is right enough. Depersonalizing. In a lot of ways, people are scared to reveal themselves, right? They don't want to open up. And I learned this trick from therapy. There, now you've learned something about me. And you're just like, how, you know, and I'm struggling with my emotions. How do I feel about this? Or how would I deal with this? And the therapist says, okay, think about your 11-year-old niece. What would you tell her if she was going through that? How do you ask employees, staff, people who work here, what would you tell someone? What was the best advice you got from your boss? That's less about you than it is about what you heard. It's not about revealing too much, because I think a workplace, regardless of whether you're a family, and I hate that, or a team or whatever, how, you know, it's a place where you can still get fired, right? And sometimes not obviously why. Consequently, people are very conservative in those spaces and do not reveal a lot of the stuff. And maybe they won't reveal the stuff that they're going to reveal in that Glassdoor review as they walk out the door. So how do you soften the opportunity so that they can speak about what's going on and what they see around them without making it about why are you good or why are you bad?
Okay, great. Elena?
I got some real quick questions. One that I always love is, what surprised you about working here?
Oh, that's so good.
Because
like
inevitably, especially when we're getting to like job stories and job video stories, most often the reason why we're investing additional time is because there's things that is really hard to understand on that job description, or it needs a reality check. And that's the reason why we're making an additional investment in that kind of story. So this idea of put yourself back when you started here on the first day. What is it that you wish you knew about?
Yeah.
That you didn't.
It's like instant employer brand strategy.
With American Airlines. Look, rain, sleet, shine, or snow, that package, that, you know, that fleet service agent is going to be out there and, you know, putting bags on, et cetera. It doesn't matter. And no matter how many times recruiters could tell these folks that, again, airports, airlines don't shut down. You are going to be out there, rain, sleet, shine, or snow. They really needed to see and experience that. So that's always a really big one, is what surprised you. We need to understand the surprises. I would only say this to the most courageous of companies. I know some of you may not be empowered to do so, but asking questions like, in the most polite way possible, of why do people quit? Sometimes that could very much be a major, huge morale issue. And in fact, there was a really awesome question here when it's like, when have these gone wrong? I can tell a story on that, so remind me on that. Okay. But really being able to be courageous enough to ask the questions of why do people quit? And when you can ask an honest question, you will absolutely get an honest answer. And however that needs to be filtered politely so that candidates can get it, whatever, but the question needs to be asked. I think the other thing that we always get to, and I even ask you this, like, what keeps you coming back every day? Right? Why do you come back is always a good one. I think another great one when we're thinking about the power of relationships might be, tell me a moment when you knew that you had found your best friend at work, right? And that's when we start to make these meaningful connections. We can ask the same types of questions around, you know, a mentor or, you know, a boss, et cetera, so that we can get to some of those just like really powerful questions. Another one that I love, and again, because I get to live in the world of purpose and meaning and blah, blah, blah. And that's not what all stories are for, but these questions of what makes your heart sing.
Right.
And I think inevitably, right, sometimes there's a privileged few of us who actually are able to align our career with our true personal values and purpose. The majority of the world cannot. So that's a pretty specific question for someone that you know was meant to be an engineer at 3 years old because they were already picking stuff apart and tearing their TV down because they were just trying to figure out how it worked. You know who those people are, and that those are questions that you can ask, to be able to get to that. But those are just some kind of just, I think, high level questions that I always really get a lot out of. And oftentimes I get cries. And, I never say this, to the client at the time, right? But I know that I've done my job when I've made at least one person cry that day in the seat. Yeah. And not because they're crying out of, fear or get in trouble, but crying because we got to something. We got to something that touched them about the work that they do. And so when I know I've done a good job as a producer, when we've made someone get that emotional about their work, or about the people, or about the culture, that they cry.
Yeah, and there's more to that, because you have to be looking and willing to look for the not shiny, pretty answers. I think so many people go into this I'm looking for the happy tale. I'm looking for the shiny penny I can kind of show the world. And the answer is, if your company is filled with people who are nothing but shiny pennies, why the heck do you have to pay them? It's a dang job. It comes with a salary, because some days you just don't want to do that part of the job, or you don't want to get out of bed that day. And that's just, be an adult, let's go do it. The trick to strong employer brands, strong storytelling, is being willing to tell the other side, right? The best story in the world is not, one day Luke Skywalker woke up and he was king of the world. He had a lightsaber. Yay, end of story. He had to go through some stuff. He had to face his fears. He had to change. Every story involves crisis. It involves conflict. It involves dealing and overcoming. And if you try to tell a story without any of that, you are not, in fact, telling a story. What you're doing.
And candidates and employees are going to see that as bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, we have a generation now, and in fact, I think my niece might be on, like, they are like natives of knowing, of seeing a glossy, authentic stock photo of something versus something that's real and authentic. These generations more than ever know that these jobs are not supposed to be sunshine and rainbows. They know there's some suck, and companies have to start leaning into that if they're going to have any chance of giving candidates an opportunity to self-screen in or self-screen out.
Yeah, because every company who says nice things about themselves, now effectively they're all saying the same thing. And how can I, as a candidate, potentially choose from 5 delicious gourmet meals that sound exactly the same? Tell me where it's going to be tough. Tell me where it's going to be unpleasant. Tell me where I'm going to be pushed. Some people literally pick the job that's the hardest job because they live to be challenged. The reason why people join the Army Rangers, the reason why people take jobs, or why people become astronauts, is not because the job is easy. They take it because the job is in fact hard, and you sell the hard.
The best story, and I have to find it, is, remember it was like the major Antarctica expedition that was first ever.
Shellington.
The best job description there ever was literally this like little paper post that said, going on an Antarctica, expedition, not a lot of money, not a lot of pay,
no glory.
You will be remembered forever. But if we get this right,
yeah, you might die.
You will be remembered forever. And you know how many people showed up at that dock the next day? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of willing people ready to make their mark. That is probably the best example of a job post, of a job story there ever was, to say, this is going to suck. You're not going to get a lot of money. You're going to be cold. You might die. But if we win, you are going to be in the history books.
Look at all the people who apply for
so much impact.
Army Rangers, or literally the candidate experience of being an Army Ranger involves being shot at. I'm sorry for those of you who think it's all about white glove service. The best candidate experience, the best storytelling is, this is what the real world is. This is what the real job is. And it will involve humping a 45-pound rucksack over, through the wet sand, and then occasionally being shot at. Cool, right? They know that there's not great healthcare. They know that there's not a lot of pay. They do it for a reason. If you can't tap into that, if you can't find that, you are going to sound like every other company, and your world will be about hiring mediocre talent because you haven't found the thing that's special about you. And until you do that, why would you expect anyone else to do the hard work of finding it and deciding that's where they want to be?
So the key takeaway I have on my sheet here is embrace that you're not a shiny penny.
No one is.
Chinese
No
hen.
one is. There is no such
Right.
thing. Like, look, I mean, like, think of you look at a Google who is perpetually listed as the best place to ever work in the known universe since time memorial began.
And then they have walkouts.
And honestly, it's a place where 25 years ago, they might have been seen as innovative, and now they're about selling ads. And it's a safe, stable place. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the reason people show up are different. Maybe some people are showing up for the coffee and the 6 different kinds of milk that are 14 steps away from every single desk. That's not what drives me. That's not what drives Elena. I don't know you very well, Amber, but I'm going to guess that doesn't drive you. You want to solve problems. And if that's the thing you want to do, that may not be the place for you. That's the trick. Who are you for? What are you all about?
James and Elena, I appreciate we are coming up on time, and there is a question, a bit of chatter, if you will, about one particular topic. So I'd like to ask the question. In terms of recognition programs for companies, how do we move beyond that and tell these stories beyond the walls of our organization? So not just recognizing in the company, but kind of spreading it beyond.
So telling stories of recognition, or I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
So as we're thinking about values, right, we've talked about, it's a collection of these unique stories, and recognition programs, in my experience, are often built on values, and they're recognizing employees in a company. And I think the question is, how do we move beyond kind of recognizing within the company for having done great value, but how can we extend the stories outside beyond our organization of people doing great things within our company?
Oh yeah, and it's happening all the time. And we've seen this happening even much more so now than ever. Although I will say, first of all, if we're going to recognize people, we also have to remember that how people want to be recognized could be very different. And so we certainly have had it, my own colleagues who are very embarrassed if I were to publicly acknowledge them in a major way. Some of them want to be acknowledged differently. And I know for some corporations that can be very, very difficult, but I think one is we have to be very sensitive to how folks want to be acknowledged, period. And so being publicly acknowledged in that larger way could be very uncomfortable for someone. So that's something that I want to say, first and foremost, because people have gotten in trouble for it. I've even gotten in trouble for that. Even in my own organization. But let's just say you have someone who just loves being the public cheerleader, rah, 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 super great. Inevitably, those great kinds of recognition stories of why they're being acknowledged inside of their, of their kind of internal spaces are also in part the reasons why the clients are going to want to work with you as well. People work for people, people hire people. Our clients hire us. Not because we are a name, it's because they're going to work with Abby or Elena, or they're going to do blah, blah, blah. And so it's in the same way to remember that the people are our most valuable asset. And so when we can share stories about how people are, really breaking it down, they're doing awesome. I mean, we're especially seeing this with a lot of our frontline workers about how hard they've been working. We've been seeing this in healthcare. Lisa, you've talked about feeding the community. Those aren't just stories, again, right? Because the world is watching us. Those aren't just stories that our employees care about themselves. Those are stories that our community cares about. And so when we can be acknowledged, when our families can I think be a part of that type of celebration with us is great. And certainly that's where things like video or film, which is, my bread and butter, has become so key to how we can start to do that. And now they have this beautiful piece of content that they'll share. And the last thing I'll add is that that's what gets viral. It's not the paid stuff.
Right.
We've gotten well over 1 million views on our job videos because we were featuring these dope employees who are the tower climbing technicians who give us our cellular service. It was this amazing video. And then you let them take that video and share it on Facebook. And then their wives shared it. And then their husbands shared it. And then their kids shared it. And then their grandmas. And then then you have all of the rest of their colleagues. You have well over 1 million views. And then they went from having a $33 million recruitment spend to a $3 million recruitment spend. It was all because you put your employees at the front of that kind of campaign and to share it, and it went viral. Yeah. That's the power of what this can have to make real changes and real moves in your organization.
Yeah, totally. I just want to make sure we avoid any sense of kabuki theater around recognition. If you want to recognize someone, recognize them. Don't make a program around it. Just say, look, if I feel valued because you value, it's not because you have a program that you gave me a $25 Starbucks card or you have put my name in a wall. It's because you've actually valued me. And the difference between that sounds painfully subtle, but is night and flipping day. And I think too many companies programatize and processitize their recognition instead of actually valuing the people they're trying to support. At the same time, I'm a big believer that what you reward is what your company is. If every quarter your CEO points to say, this is how many volunteer hours we've put together collectively, guess what your company values? If your CEO talks about sales, guess what your company values? And by the way, those things should not just inform, they should be the absolute bedrock foundation of what your brand is and what your values are, of what your culture is, and trying to separate those out and parse them out and saying, this is over here and this is over here. You're doomed. You have to have those things connected, coalesced, and connected in a way that when you do take one piece apart and make a video about it, they go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I see exactly how it comes back to the core.
James, as soon as you started talking about being doomed, Katie arrived. So
I hope that wasn't a bad omen. No, thank you guys so much. This has been an incredible conversation. The chat has been just flowing. People have said this is the best chat of the event so far. Thank you both for spending an hour with us and lending your expertise. I hope we have you back sometime soon. Talent chooses you.
Oh, I wrote a book. If you want to read my book, read a book. Otherwise, if you don't, you can watch videos that Elena makes. There's so much more of us to go around.
Yes, and we will put James's book in our bookstore for the conference. We'll link to it and promote it, and Elena's website. So please feel free to connect with these two and Amber. Hub is doing a lunch roundtable during our break, so visit Mim and Debbie doing that. There's also one with Acadia Benefits, Hayes, and Cross Benefits today. Check out the networking section, visit our wonderful sponsors, and take a little break before our next keynote. Thanks for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you.